Alldus podcast is brought to you by Alldus International, supplying your expert AI and digital transformation staffing needs across the US and Europe. Today, you are listening to our AI in Action series, where leading minds in AI from across the world share their story, success, and advice. AI in Action cuts through the hype and explores the true impact of artificial intelligence in our world today.
You're listening to AI in Action. I'm your host, JP Valentine. Our guest today is Scott Zoldi. Scott is the Chief Analytics Officer at FICO. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thank you, JP. Great to be here.
That's our pleasure. So, Scott, let's start with yourself. Can you give us a brief background of your journey in technology, from where you got started initially, maybe some of the roles you've held along the way, and take us up to today as you're now leading the analytics division at FICO?
Sure. I'll start in graduate school. I was a PhD physicist with a very heavy focus on computational science. And interesting enough, what I studied back then was chaos theory. And so I was focused on problems where I wanted to understand tremendous complexity and try to make predictions from what is seemingly unpredictable. And so my journey had been very much focused around understanding dynamics, making predictions, and then using high-scale, high-performance computing to make those decisions. My journey from learning and spending time on that from a PhD topic perspective brought me to Los Alamos National Laboratory, where I spent some time as a director's fellow. I continued to refine my skills and interest in research around making predictions of complexity in data. And eventually, I left the Los Alamos National Laboratory. I joined a company called H&C Software, which later merged with FICO, where I had that opportunity. I had an opportunity to, as a scientist, study human behavior in transaction data and in their behaviors and make predictions about whether or not somebody is experiencing fraud, whether they're in compliance, let's say, with regulatory rules, or what is the likelihood that they might pay back a loan. And I found that tremendously fascinating. And I've stayed with FICO now for 23 years, starting as a junior scientist and making my way now to a chief analytics officer. And along that route, spending times with hundreds and hundreds of customers, solving all kinds of different problems with machine learning, and authoring more than 100 patents around practical applications of machine learning to a lot of the business problems that we've encountered in financial services and telecommunications, insurance, and other areas.
Thank you so much for that, Scott. Really appreciate the background. And you're one of a rare breed. I don't need to tell you this, but to have such longevity in one organization, it stands out. It's interesting, and it has me thinking about many questions we can ask along the way about your journey and what's kept you engaged over so many years. But before we do that, most people will be familiar with FICO, but for those listening, potentially some of our international audience, taking a step back, could you give us a high-level overview of FICO as an entire organization? And then we can jump into your role in analytics, and then also your journey from the various different roles that you've held throughout your time there.
FICO is a company that's been founded in the 50s around this concept of leveraging analytics to make informed empirical decisions. And back in those early days, we were very much pivotal around making decisions around who might be a good credit risk or a bad credit risk. And it used to be that you'd do that by looking the person in the face and maybe making a decision that was hugely subjective to one that was data-driven. And that's been the really foundation of our company around the development of models that are empirically fair, built robustly and responsibly to help businesses make better decisions. And so one of the products that we're well known for is the FICO score, which underpins much of lending across the globe. But here in the United States, very many decisions are made using this score, which is used in combination with other information about customers to make a decision around whether to lend and under what terms to lend. We have other applications. We're very well known in the fraud and compliance space. So in the fraud space, we have monitored more than 2/3 of the world's payment card transactions, and in real time making determinations based on machine learning models whether or not somebody is experiencing fraud. So potentially someone has taken over their account, and helping banks with this sort of real time machine learning based scores that they use in their decisions to whether or not to block those transactions. And there's so many different examples, JP, of this in our business, but at the underpinning, it's around analytics and business data to help companies make better decisions and automate those decisions.
Given your tenure at FICO, you've really had a unique insight into the different evolutions of this technology and the advancements, and obviously FICO has played such a pivotal role in particularly the US financial markets that you guys have to stay up to date and current with all the emerging trends. Can you give us some insight into what that has been like to see that journey happen and trying to keep up with the constant changes of the technology market, particularly as we enter into automation and AI? What's it been like?
So, it's been really interesting. So, if I look back 23 years ago, right, the concept of using a machine learning model in different financial decisions was very new, and people treated it with much suspicion, right? That we had these black boxes that were going to make better decisions than established technology, which was more transparent. And we spent a lot of time trying to convince customers that the models worked. And we did that through taking those machine learning models and demonstrating the performance and watching them over time and showing that they're a viable technology. And in fact, we were one of the companies that pioneered the use of machine learning in financial services. From that time, like 23 years ago or so, we went through this sort of change where AI and machine learning went through, I guess it's got out of its third wind and it became very popular. And it got to a point probably 10 years ago where if you weren't using machine learning and AI in some part of your business, then you were very much considered to be behind the times. And my biggest concern as I looked across the industry was that people were now leveraging the technology that maybe barely understood the technology. And that the fact that they could gather the data, the fact that they did have open source, and the fact that there was cloud computing resources is a wonderful thing, unless you're not properly forming the questions around how best to build those models. So we went from a skepticism maybe 25 years ago to about 10 years ago, this unbridled enthusiasm and optimism. And where we are today, JP, is that I think we're all kind of reflecting now. And what I mean by that is we've gone through a portion of this pandemic. We've seen data change. We've seen our lives upended. We've seen companies that have struggled with machine learning models that maybe they didn't quite understand well enough to understand how they react. And I see it as a time to grow up. So many companies are focused on, okay, how do I leverage all the goodness of machine learning and really bring that value to the models that they're using? But I want to do that in a responsible way. And for us, that means that models are built robustly, which essentially means that we're taking the time to build them correctly, not just trying to get them done quickly, that we understand and we use things such as interpretable machine learning models so we can understand exactly what drives those models to make those predictions, that we monitor for things like bias and ethics challenges with machine learning models. And then we have an audit trail at the very final piece of it where we can show proof of work, that we adhere to best practices of building models that aren't going to harm people while they're trying to provide that business benefit, and then monitor that over time. And so, I'd say it's a growing up, right? We've gotten to this point now where I think we're seeing machine learning really cement itself as a core part of decisioning in much of our lives. But we've also, I think, as an industry, have woken up to the fact that we need the same level of governance and ability that we have in other parts of our businesses, such as on software development, where we have code repositories and regression tests and continuous integration and testing. These sort of concepts are pretty new for things like AI and machine learning, but critically important given the fact that the decisions that we make with some of these models really impact people's lives in very significant ways.
Scott, you touched on it there, but I want to have a follow-up question specifically around the trends and hot topics that you and your team see within data science and AI. A lot of what you're doing is trying to prepare FICO for tomorrow and what tomorrow looks like. So can you give us some insight into some of the things you and your group are focused on looking at and what trends that you see?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're focused on from a a hot topics perspective and trends is really the awareness, I think, more broadly of the fact that AI regulation is coming, right? And being prepared to ensure that we can respond to that effectively. So people can build machine learning models. Some of them may be deep learning models or some other variant of it. But how do we ensure that we're meeting the regulatory and compliance aspects of these models? And so one of these focus areas that we spend a lot of time on is ensuring that we recognize that models like credit risk models are considered high risk according to the EU regulation, because obviously making a bad decision around someone's credit worthiness has a material impact on their lives. And choosing modeling technologies and designing specific machine learning algorithms and IP around exposing the information we're going to need to justify and demonstrate that we're meeting the regulatory rigor. Part of this, actually, JP, is dispelling myths, right? And one of those myths is around this concept of explainable AI. And I like to talk about it as explainable AI. There's the good, the bad, and the ugly, and most of it's bad and ugly, because we apply an algorithm, usually with explainable AI, where we don't understand the core algorithm, let's say the machine learning algorithm, and then we apply an explainable AI algorithm that we also don't understand. And it might produce what are reasons or explanations, but they're not suitable from a regulatory perspective. And so what that means is, we're focused on the fact that we need interpretable machine learning models that we can say specifically, these are the relationships that have been learned in terms of combinations of features that are used to make a decision about a consumer. And is it palatable? Should it be used or should it not be used? And more importantly than that, to focus also on whether it shows any bias in itself so that we can monitor it over time. And these interpretable machine learning models, I think, are one of the hottest trends, because you get the machine learning prediction, but you've trained the machine learning model to meet the requirements or constrain it around the solutions it can find to be those that would meet those regulatory requirements. And I think we'll see more and more of that, where companies are waking up to the fact that, hey, I'm willing to have a little less performance to ensure that I'm not harming people. And that takes new types of technologies that are constrained to make sure that we can meet that regulatory requirement.
You are listening to the Alldus podcast. When you're looking to scale your team, or if you are interested in showcasing your company in a future episode, reach out today. Or if you're in the market for a new role, visit our website to view open positions, www.alldus.com.
Switching directions slightly, Scott, I want to now spend some time talking about the team that you've built there at FICO, because from what you've already told us, it seems quite advanced, and you guys have had a long-term focus on utilization of machine learning models. Can you give us some insight into the current makeup of the broader AI and data team at FICO, and the types of project life cycles that you would see in the combination of engineering, analytics, machine learning?
Yeah, absolutely, JP. Generally, what we're focused on with respect to teams is really looking at one is diversity, right? We want to make sure that we have teams that are diverse in terms of their backgrounds and in terms of their training. But just generally, we're trying to find people that have different perspectives. And, I think that's critically important in terms of, how we design technologies. But beyond the diversity of thought and that we really encourage and nurture, we have broad categories of scientists and specialized sort of roles. So we generally have more of the research and development side, right? These are the individuals that are focused very heavily around what are the technology advancements occurring in academia and elsewhere. How do we solve these sort of problems with respect to new types of machine learning algorithms? We have the data science team, which are specialized groups of scientists that are focused on how best to understand new trends in data, right? That's where they may be applying specialized, unsupervised analytic techniques to pick out patterns that we're unaware of in terms of how the data and the market is changing, so we can add that to model. We have teams that are focused on production model development. This is essentially teams that are specialists at, using common code repositories of features that we have proven very valuable in the past, in addition to creating new features that they use in these production models. We have integration teams of data scientists that focus on the DevOps parts of this, where they're going to talk about model ops and DevOps and how we ensure that we meet the contract with our software development teams in terms of what comes into the models, what the model footprint will look like within our software, and then do the integration and development work. And then I think finally, we have focus on core parts of our data science teams that are very business focused. If we don't absolutely understand the problems that we're working on from a business perspective, how it relates and to how our products are being developed and whether or not we're developing that AI or machine learning model appropriately, then we're all going to be off track, right? And then all these scientists, they'll come together as we look at these project life cycles of, let's say, building a fraud model for the US market. We would be assembling the data, getting the business requirements, ensuring that we have agreement around the deployment methodologies we're going to use for this model, getting that insight from the data science team, building that into the next version of the model, and then doing all the testing that's required so that our customers can depend on these models such that they're going to be of high performance, they'll be monitored, provide the returns that we'd expect them to return. So it's a combination of skill sets, and what we find is many of the scientists find, the niche areas or the sub areas, if you will, minors, right, in terms of their specialization, so that we can function with a broad line of sight across all parts of our business here at FICO.
Obviously, the last 18 months or so have been incredibly challenging, and we've seen a lot of change across all industries. And I think we're still getting to grips with the impact of COVID and what the world will look like post-COVID. Looking specifically at FICO and your broader analytics team, when you look at how the world is shaping up now, what changes are you expecting? And with that, what opportunities are there going to be at FICO for people who are interested in not just data science or machine learning, but your industry in particular?
I think with COVID, what we saw was a number of things that kind of inform our business directions and just the industry overall. First, we saw this sort of hyper acceleration into digital. Organizations that weren't digital are becoming digital, and data is flowing through. Connections are coming together with respect to new types of problems, and really an advancement in machine learning and AI solving different types of problems. So I think one part of this is there'll be many more types of machine learning models and solutions that we'll be developing based on additional acceleration of, let's say, the digital transformation. I think the other major sort of thing that I'd say that occurred during the pandemic is this sort of recognition that these models have to be built in a way that we keep in mind the following, which is the job of a data scientist is not done when the model's built. It's only started. And so concepts like monitoring models and monitoring for bias drift and having the controls in place to monitor the decisions and the strategies and whether they continue to align with what the business needs is really important. So during COVID, for example, data changed dramatically. Models responded differently, and having that insight on how to adjust business strategy around that and how to monitor those models is something that is new for many. We did a survey with heads of different leading analytics organizations, and only 20% of them were monitoring models. And I think that's going to change. I think the pandemic has shown us that there's a lot of change, and I think that brings new opportunities for new types of models. It also brings in a lot more rigor moving forward, that we're not going to just trust the AI or the machine learning model. We're going to deeply understand it and monitor it so we know how to pivot. And I think businesses will succeed based on that understanding and that interpretability, and also succeed on their ability to monitor and know when to make that change.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Final question from me then, Scott. With the ever-changing landscape that you and your group operate in, I'm sure there's always new projects coming down the line, and with that, the need to continuously add new talent. Can you give us some insight or speak to what types of opportunities there are going to be for people who are in the field at FICO, whether it be future data scientists, engineers, and then more importantly, as you go about building a team, what is it that you look for when you're interviewing people?
Yeah, so I think let me start with the second part. What I'm looking for in generally are people that are going to have a really deep passion for the problem that they're solving. And I think the very best people at FICO are those that have a very strong relationship from a data scientist perspective with their clients problems, and that can work with our product managers and the business owners to codify and to describe what that problem looks like. But we're going to look for people certainly with all the technical chops, right? That they have very strong mathematics backgrounds, and statistics backgrounds, and computing backgrounds. But we're also going to look for people that have a deep intuition, an ability to relate to our customers and to the customers that they serve. And that's how we come up with the very best sort of technologies. In terms of what we will see in terms of opportunities moving forward, I think we just have to take a lead from where regulation's headed. This deep sort of understanding of interpretability and explainability is super important. As an example, the GDPR regulation's been out there for a long time, and part of GDPR talks about automated decisioning. And it says that if you're going to make an automated decision, you have to provide the person on the other end of that decision a set of explanations and reasons. And so that means that a human being that is using this model needs to speak to the human being impacted by this model and talk to them in human terms, not in ones and zeros. And I think this sort of person and jobs where we can relate to and better explain how decisions are being inferred from machine learning models is going to be a really critical part of what we're going to look for in types of people that can help relate and make the machine learning model interface a little bit more seamlessly with the human beings that it's impacting, whether it be the people making the decisions using the models or the people impacted by the decisions. And if that's done well, we'll continue to see the adoption of machine learning in these fields. If it's done poorly, we're going to see slowing and rethinking. So that is what I'm looking for, people that have that intuition and have that desire to get great models, but models that we can talk to and we can interpret and we can explain to others so that there's not a huge sort of mystique around that. Otherwise, we're in a situation where models might be not necessarily working properly. Maybe decision-making becomes callous, and that's not going to be a workable solution for anyone.
Scott, thank you so much for coming on today and talking to us. I really appreciate you sharing your background. Amazing to see such tenure and the growth of your role. Talking to us about the ever-changing landscape in FICO and how you guys stay abreast of the emerging trends, and then giving us some insight into types of people you look for and what would make somebody successful. So we really appreciate your time, and we wish you and your team all the best in the years to come. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, JP. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Alldus Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. We are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and any Android podcast of choice. You can also head over to our website, www.alldus.com, to listen to more podcasts, view our open roles, and stay up to date with industry news. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for more great episodes coming very soon.